My name is Amelia Roberts, and at 68 years old, I never thought I would be locked in my own home. After building a real estate empire with my late husband, I invited my son William and his wife Grace to live with me in my mansion. At first, it seemed perfect. But slowly, Grace began to change, taking control of my life piece by piece. What she never expected was that the guest room where she imprisoned me contained the very documents that would be her undoing. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my scheming daughter-in-law, let me know where you are watching from, and tap that subscribe button if you have ever had to outsmart someone who thought you were past your prime. I spent 45 years building my real estate empire across New England. What started as a small agency in Portsmouth grew into Lighthouse Luxury Properties, specializing in historic estates and waterfront mansions. My husband James and I worked side by side, with him handling the financial aspects while I managed acquisitions and sales. We built a reputation for honesty and excellence, eventually becoming the premier agency for high-end properties in 3 states. The crown jewel of our success was our own home, a 12,000-square-foot Georgian colonial overlooking the Atlantic. We called it Harborview, with its 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, and 6 acres of manicured gardens. James and I raised our son William there, hoping one day he would take over the family business. 5 years ago, James died suddenly of a heart attack while we were vacationing in Florida. At 63, I found myself a widow with an empty house and a business I no longer had the heart to run daily. I sold the company but kept ownership of all our properties, including Harborview. The proceeds from the business sale, combined with our existing wealth, ensured I would live comfortably for the rest of my life. William had moved to Boston after college, working in finance rather than real estate. He visited regularly after his father died, checking in on me every couple of weeks. 3 years ago, he brought home Grace, a stunning brunette, 15 years his junior, whom he had met at a charity gala. She worked in art acquisition for wealthy clients, with connections to galleries throughout the East Coast. Their whirlwind courtship lasted 6 months before they announced their engagement. The wedding was small but elegant, held on our property. I was genuinely happy for William. At 35, he had finally found someone who seemed to appreciate his gentle nature and intelligence. Grace charmed everyone at the reception, paying special attention to me. After their honeymoon in Italy, they settled into a luxury apartment in Boston. Grace would call me weekly, asking for advice about decorating or entertaining. She seemed genuinely interested in developing a relationship with me, which warmed my heart. When I mentioned having minor hip surgery scheduled, Grace immediately suggested they temporarily move into Harborview to help with my recovery. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs. The first week after my surgery, Grace rearranged the living room furniture without asking, claiming it created better flow. I said nothing, not wanting to seem ungrateful for her help. Then family heirlooms began migrating to different rooms or disappearing into storage. When I questioned these changes, Grace would smile sweetly and say, "William and I thought this arrangement would be easier for you to navigate while recovering." William, always conflict-averse like his father, became increasingly passive around Grace. My once outspoken son now deferred to her on everything from meal planning to which family traditions to observe during holidays. One afternoon, I noticed Grace scrolling through my phone contacts. When I asked what she was doing, she replied cheerfully, "Just updating your contact list. Some of these numbers are outdated, and I added emergency contacts for your doctors." Later, I discovered several of my oldest friends had been deleted, people Grace had deemed negative influences when I mentioned disagreements we had in the past. Family photos began disappearing from the main living areas, replaced with abstract art pieces Grace brought from her collection. The formal dining room, where generations of our family had gathered, was transformed into a modern entertainment space with no trace of its history. The most disturbing pattern was how Grace questioned my memories. When I would mention past events or traditions, she would exchange glances with William and gently suggest, "I think you might be mixing up your dates, Amelia." That happened differently, remember? Even when I was certain of my recollections, the seed of doubt she planted made me second-guess myself. 3 months after my surgery, when I was fully recovered and expecting them to return to Boston, Grace announced they had sublet their apartment. We think it makes more sense for us to stay here permanently. This house is too big for you to manage alone, and we can help take care of everything. Their first dinner party was the moment I realized how deliberately I was being sidelined. I overheard Grace inviting several prominent community members, including the mayor and his wife. When I mentioned looking forward to the evening, Grace appeared startled, then regained her composure. "Oh, Amelia, I completely forgot to mention. William and I thought it might be overwhelming for you. These are mostly business contacts for a project William is considering investing in." That evening, I listened to laughter and conversation from my bedroom as 16 guests dined in my home without me. When I confronted William the next day, he avoided eye contact. "Mom, Grace thought you needed rest. You know how these business dinners can go late, and we were concerned about tiring you out." It was the first of many excuses that became a pattern, each one subtly reinforcing the narrative that I was becoming too frail and confused to participate in normal social activities. With each passing month, I felt my authority in my own home slipping away, as Grace steadily positioned herself as the lady of the manor, while relegating me to the role of aging mother-in-law who needed management rather than respect. 6 months after moving in permanently, Grace began scheduling doctor appointments for me without consultation. "I noticed you seemed a bit unsteady yesterday, so I made an appointment with Dr. Feldman for Wednesday," she would announce at breakfast. When I insisted I felt fine, she would exchange concerned glances with William. At these appointments, Grace would accompany me into the examination room, speaking before I could answer the doctor's questions. "She has been having trouble sleeping and seems confused in the evenings," she would report, though I had experienced neither problem. Last week, she put her coffee cup in the linen cabinet instead of the dishwasher, and she forgot her oldest friend Barbara's name when she called. These exaggerations painted a picture of cognitive decline that did not match my reality. After one such appointment, Dr. Feldman suggested memory testing as a precaution. The tests showed my cognitive function was normal for my age, with only mild, short-term memory issues, but Grace latched onto this minor finding. She began referring to any small mistake I made as a senior moment, highlighting them to William. If I misplaced my reading glasses or forgot where I parked at the grocery store, Grace would shake her head with exaggerated concern. "That is the 3rd time this week, Mother. Perhaps we should talk to Dr. Feldman about medication options." William's work hours mysteriously increased during this time, keeping him away from home and largely unaware of the subtle psychological warfare. When he was home, Grace ensured they spent most evenings in their private wing of the house, citing my need for early bedtimes. One Tuesday morning, Grace suggested it would be easier if she handled my financial management. "Banking has changed so much with all the online systems now," she explained. "William and I can make sure all your bills are paid on time, and you will not have to worry about remembering passwords and security questions." Before I could object, she produced a stack of papers requiring my signature. "These just authorize us to speak to your financial institutions and handle routine matters," she explained. I hesitated, but with William nodding encouragingly, I signed several documents. Later, I discovered I had granted them power of attorney and access to all my accounts, not just bill-paying authority. Around this time, new medications began appearing with my morning orange juice. "Dr. Feldman prescribed these for your anxiety and to help with sleep," Grace explained, when I questioned the small white pill. Though I did not recall the doctor mentioning anxiety medication, I took it rather than create conflict. Within days, I noticed increased drowsiness and difficulty concentrating, effects that reinforced Grace's narrative about my declining capabilities. When I stopped taking the mystery medication, claiming it upset my stomach, Grace's smile tightened. "We really should follow the doctor's orders, Mother. I will call about adjusting your dosage." My resistance was consistently met with gentle gaslighting. If I complained about feeling controlled, Grace would tear up. "We are just trying to help you, Amelia. It hurts that you think our care comes from anything but love." William would then comfort her, making me feel like the villain for questioning their intentions. The isolation tactics intensified gradually. Phone calls from friends went unreturned because I forgot to tell you they called, or I thought I mentioned it yesterday. Mail from my few remaining independent accounts would be accidentally misplaced. When I asked about certain letters or statements, Grace would search performatively before suggesting, "You might have already opened it and filed it away, Amelia. You know how you sometimes do things and forget." Visitors were discouraged with excuses about my fragile condition or fabricated scheduling conflicts. "Amelia is having one of her difficult days," Grace would tell callers, within my hearing. "Perhaps next week would be better for a visit." My social circle shrank as friends gradually stopped attempting contact after repeated rebuffs. The breaking point came when I discovered Grace had canceled my 20-year membership to the weekly bridge club at the country club. For decades, Tuesday afternoons had been sacred, spent with my closest friends playing cards and catching up on local happenings. When I prepared to leave for bridge one Tuesday, Grace appeared surprised. "Oh, Mother, I thought you remembered. The club called last month about the membership renewal, and you said you were too tired to continue with bridge this year. I handled the cancellation for you." I knew with absolute certainty I had never said any such thing. When I called the club directly, the membership coordinator confirmed Grace had canceled my membership, citing my health concerns and mobility issues. That evening, I confronted both Grace and William in the kitchen. For the first time, I raised my voice, demanding to know why they were systematically cutting me off from my friends and activities. Grace immediately burst into tears, while William looked stunned. "We are just worried about you, Mother," Grace sobbed, leaning against William. "Last month, you got lost driving home from the club and called William in a panic. Do not you remember? The stress of maintaining all these social obligations is taking a toll on your health." I had no recollection of getting lost or calling William. When I said as much, Grace exchanged that now familiar concerned look with my son. "This is exactly what we are worried about," she whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "The memory lapses are getting more frequent." William, torn between his wife's tears and his mother's anger, suggested we all take a break and discuss things when everyone was calmer. As they left the kitchen, I overheard Grace murmuring, "Dr. Feldman warned us denial would be part of the progression." That night, alone in my bedroom, I realized I was fighting a losing battle against an opponent who was systematically undermining my credibility and autonomy. Each time I pushed back, Grace expertly twisted the situation to make me appear unstable or ungrateful. My own son was being manipulated into believing his mother was experiencing cognitive decline, and I seemed powerless to change this false narrative that was consuming my life. By the 1-year mark of their permanent residence at Harborview, I had been gradually relocated from the master suite to a guest bedroom in the East Wing. The transition happened in stages, each presented as a thoughtful accommodation for my benefit. First, Grace suggested converting the library adjacent to the master bedroom into a sitting room for her and William. "You mentioned the late-night reading light bothers your sleep, and this way, we will not disturb you," she explained. This separation created a buffer zone, distancing me from their private conversations. Next came the suggestion that the guest suite might be easier for you to navigate with its single-level layout and attached bathroom. "The stairs to the master bath have those tricky, uneven steps," Grace pointed out. "This would eliminate any risk of nighttime falls." The East Wing guest suite was beautiful, but strategically isolated from the main living areas. To reach the kitchen or family room, I now had to traverse the entire length of the house. This distance made impromptu participation in household activities nearly impossible, especially as Grace began scheduling meals at irregular times. Over several weeks, my personal items migrated from the master bedroom to the guest suite. Each time I returned to retrieve something, more of my possessions had been packed and relocated. "We thought you would be more comfortable with your things around you," Grace would say, though I never requested the moves. Meanwhile, Grace embarked on extensive redecorating projects throughout the main living spaces. My traditional furnishings disappeared into storage, replaced by modern pieces in a minimalist style I had always disliked. When I expressed concern about family antiques being removed, Grace assured me they were being properly stored to prevent damage. William, increasingly absent due to work commitments, seemed oblivious to the systematic erasure of my presence from my own home. On the rare occasions when he noticed changes, Grace would redirect his attention. "Remember how your mother mentioned wanting to update the house? I am just helping fulfill her wishes." By this point, William appeared conflicted. Sometimes I caught him studying me with concerned eyes, as if trying to reconcile the competent mother he had known with the supposedly confused woman his wife described. Once, he approached me alone, asking gently if I was truly comfortable with all the changes. Before I could fully express my concerns, Grace appeared, steering the conversation toward plans for the garden renovation. The critical discovery occurred 3 months after my relocation to the East Wing. While organizing the guest room closet to accommodate my transferred belongings, I found a banker's box of documents that had been stored there years ago and forgotten. Inside were financial and legal papers James and I had filed away during a renovation of his home office. Among the documents was the original deed to Harborview, showing the property solely in my name. After James died, we had discussed transferring ownership, but never completed the process. According to these papers, I remain the legal owner of the mansion and surrounding property. The box also contained James's detailed will, leaving everything to me with specific instructions for William's inheritance upon my death. Several insurance policies worth millions listed me as the sole beneficiary, and stock certificates in my name represented significant holdings in blue-chip companies. My hands trembled as I realized the implications. Despite Grace's manipulations and William's compliance, I still maintained legal control of my assets. No power of attorney forms could supersede actual ownership documents, especially if I could prove I had been manipulated into signing them. I carefully examined each document, creating an inventory of my assets and legal positions. That evening, when I heard Grace and William leave for a dinner engagement, I searched the guest suite thoroughly, finding a small wall safe behind a decorative painting that Grace had probably never noticed. The safe, installed when the room served as James's secondary office, had a combination based on our anniversary date. Inside the safe, I secured the most critical documents: the property deed, insurance policies, stock certificates, and James's will. I then replaced the painting, leaving no evidence of my discovery or actions. With this knowledge came the beginnings of a strategic plan. I needed legal counsel and witnesses to the systematic isolation and manipulation I had experienced. Most importantly, I needed to document Grace's behavior in ways that would be credible to outsiders, including my son. I attempted to confide in William the next day, catching him alone in the garden before he left for work. "I need to discuss something important with you," I began, keeping my voice steady. "About the house and some legal matters your father left unresolved." William appeared genuinely interested, sitting beside me on the garden bench. "Of course, Mom. What is it?" Before I could continue, Grace appeared on the terrace. "William, you will be late for your meeting with the investment group," she called out. "They cannot start without you." "Sorry, Mom," William said, standing quickly. "Can we continue this tonight?" "Absolutely," I replied, trying to establish a commitment. But that evening, Grace announced a last-minute dinner engagement with crucial business contacts, ensuring William and I had no private time together. This pattern repeated over the next several days, with Grace seemingly developing a sixth sense for when William and I might have uninterrupted conversations. I realized then that direct confrontation would be ineffective against such calculated interference. What I needed was irrefutable evidence presented in a situation where Grace could not control the narrative. As I formulated my approach, I became aware of increasing discussions about updating the house for potential entertainment opportunities. Grace spoke often about hosting community events and business gatherings that would put Harborview back on the social map. What she did not realize was that her ambitions to showcase what she now considered her home would provide exactly the opportunity I needed to reclaim what was legally mine. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would force everyone, especially William, to see the truth about the woman he had married. 3 weeks after discovering the documents, I overheard Grace on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in the hushed, excited tone she reserved for social planning. "Yes, absolutely. Our home can accommodate 30 for a seated dinner," she was saying. "The dining room has been completely renovated with exactly this kind of entertainment in mind." When she noticed me in the doorway, she quickly wrapped up the call. "Amelia, I did not see you there," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Wonderful news. William and I are hosting a dinner for some potential investors in his new development project." Very influential people will be here, including the Harrington family. The Harringtons were among the wealthiest families in New England, with connections to banking and real estate development. Their presence would indeed represent a significant opportunity for William, whose career had stagnated somewhat in recent years. That sounds lovely, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. When will this dinner take place? This Saturday, Grace said, already turning her attention to her planning notebook. We are thinking a 7-course meal with wine pairings. The catering company is sending over menu options this afternoon. I will need to have my navy blue dress pressed, I mused aloud, watching her reaction. Grace glanced up, momentary confusion crossing her face before she composed her features into a sympathetic smile. Oh, Amelia, I should have mentioned. This will be quite a late evening with business discussions that might seem tedious to you. William and I thought you might prefer a quiet evening to yourself. I will have Marisa prepare a special dinner tray for you. I see, I replied, letting just enough disappointment show to seem authentic. Perhaps you are right. Large gatherings can be tiring at my age. Grace appeared relieved at my easy acquiescence, launching into details about floral arrangements and place settings. As she talked, I mentally adjusted my plans. This dinner presented the perfect opportunity, with witnesses from outside our family circle who would have no reason to doubt my sanity or competence. The day of the dinner arrived with a flurry of activity. Catering staff transformed the kitchen into a staging area for the elaborate meal. Florists delivered arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas, Grace's signature aesthetic. The dining table extended to its full length, accommodated 30 place settings of my grandmother's Limoges, china, and sterling silver flatware. Around 4 o'clock, as preparations intensified, Grace approached me in the library where I had been quietly observing the activities. Amelia, I was thinking you might want to take your special relaxation medication this evening, she suggested, her voice honeyed with false concern. With all this commotion, it might help you rest comfortably. Thank you, dear, but I feel quite well today, I replied. Perhaps just a light sedative with my dinner would be sufficient. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before she nodded. As you wish. I will let Marisa know to bring your tray around 6, before guests arrive. I thanked her and returned to my book, though my attention remained on the household preparations. At 5:30, I returned to the guest suite, ostensibly to prepare for my quiet evening. Once there, I changed into my most elegant outfit, a tailored, navy blue suit that James had always said made me look formidable in the best possible way. I styled my silver hair carefully, applied makeup with precision, and selected my best pearls, a wedding anniversary gift from James. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock announced Marisa with my dinner tray. The young housekeeper, hired by Grace to replace my longtime staff, seemed surprised by my appearance. Mrs. Roberts, you look beautiful, she said, setting down the tray. Are you going somewhere this evening? Before I could answer, Grace appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation as she took in my attire. Amelia, what are you doing? Guests will be arriving in less than an hour. I thought I would join you after all, I said pleasantly. It has been too long since I have socialized with the Harringtons. Edward and I served on the hospital board together for years. Grace entered the room fully, closing the door behind her. Marisa, please give us a moment, she instructed. Once the housekeeper left, Grace's pleasant demeanor evaporated. This is not going to work, she said flatly. These people are coming to discuss serious business opportunities with William. The last thing he needs is his elderly mother confusing names and telling rambling stories about the good old days. I assure you, I am perfectly capable of appropriate dinner conversation, I replied, maintaining my calm. And the Harringtons are old friends. That is exactly the problem, Grace snapped. You will talk about the past and embarrass William with stories about when he was starting out. These investors need to see him as a confident business leader, not a boy living in his mother's house. I stood my ground. This is my home, Grace. I have every right to dine at my own table. Something dark flashed in her eyes. Your home? Look around you, Amelia. Who manages this household now? Who makes all the decisions? When people visit Harborview, whose taste and style do they see? This has not been your home for quite some time. The naked hostility in her voice confirmed everything I had suspected, but could never prove. In that moment, she had abandoned all pretense of caring concern. Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced William's arrival. "What is going on? Grace, the florist needs final approval on the centerpiece, and you are not answering your phone." Grace quickly rearranged her features into a mask of distress. "William, your mother is insisting on joining the business dinner. I have tried to explain how important these connections are for your development deal." William looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, Grace and I discussed this. Tonight is really about securing investors for the Westbrook project. Some of these conversations might get technical." "I understand business discussions, William," I reminded him. "I built a company from the ground up with your father." "That was different, and it was years ago," he replied, avoiding my eyes. "Today's real estate development is more complex, with environmental regulations and community input requirements." "Maybe just for tonight, Mom?" he added, his tone making it clear this was not really a request. "We can arrange a proper family dinner with the Harringtons another time." Grace placed a hand on his arm. "The first guests will be arriving any minute. We need to get downstairs." "Fine," I said, suddenly tired of the charade. "I will stay here this evening. Go attend to your guests." Relief washed over both their faces. "Thank you for understanding," William said, already turning to leave. "I will come check on you later." Grace lingered a moment. "Enjoy your dinner, Mother. Try to get some rest." They left together, pulling the door closed behind them. I waited, listening to their retreating footsteps, then moved toward the door. When I turned the handle, nothing happened. I tried again, more forcefully. The door would not budge. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had locked me in. For several minutes, I stood frozen, unable to process the implications of what had just happened. My son and his wife had actually imprisoned me in my own home. I knocked on the door, calling William's name, but the thick wood muffled my voice, and the guest wing was too far from the main areas for anyone to hear. Initial shock gave way to rage as I pounded on the door, then tried using various items as makeshift tools to release the lock. Nothing worked. The anger eventually burned itself out, replaced by a cold, strategic calm I recognized from my business days. This was no longer just about reclaiming my position in the household. Grace had crossed a line that required a decisive response. Through the heating vent near the floor, voices occasionally carried from the main dining room. I positioned myself near it, straining to hear fragments of conversation. Most was indistinct, but certain phrases came through clearly, particularly when Grace's voice rose with excitement. Considering selling the property next year, she was saying to someone, "Perfect for a boutique hotel conversion with the waterfront access." Later, William's voice. "Need to discuss options with my mother, of course." Grace's immediate response. "Becoming increasingly difficult to manage at home, memory care facility, with excellent recommendations." Each overheard snippet confirmed what I had suspected. Grace was actively planning to sell Harborview and place me in a care facility, using William's concern for my well-being as leverage to gain control of my assets. The manipulation was so complete that William now apparently believed his mother incapable of making her own decisions. As guests departed around 11, I heard Grace assuring someone, "We will have the property valuation completed next month. Our attorney is preparing the necessary papers." I sat in the armchair by the window, watching headlights disappear down the driveway, my resolve hardening with each passing minute. Tomorrow would begin a new phase in this silent war, one in which I would finally use the ammunition I had been carefully gathering. Grace had made a critical error tonight, providing exactly the catalyst I needed to implement the plan I had been formulating since discovering those documents. At midnight, the lock turned, and William entered alone, looking tired and slightly ashamed. "I am sorry about earlier, Mom," he began. "Grace gets anxious about these business functions, and she wanted everything to be perfect." "Did you know she locked me in?" I asked directly. William flushed. "She thought it would be better if you did not wander into the party unexpectedly. It was just for a few hours." "Your wife imprisoned me in my own home, William," I stated flatly. "How would you describe that action to the police?" or to our family attorney. Mom, please. It is not that serious. We are just concerned about your episodes of confusion. He would not meet my eyes as he spoke the words Grace had clearly planted in his mind. I see, I replied simply. Good night, William. As he left, carefully leaving the door unlocked, I knew our relationship had reached a breaking point. My son had become so entangled in his wife's manipulations that he could justify locking his mother away. The time for subtle resistance was over. Tomorrow would begin the counteroffensive I should have launched months ago. The morning after being locked in my room, I waited until both William and Grace had left the house before beginning my counterattack. My first task was establishing secure communication outside Grace's monitoring. While searching through the desk drawers in the guest suite, I found an old cell phone I had used before upgrading several years ago. By some miracle, it still powered on, though the battery was critically low. I located a charging cable in the same drawer and plugged it in, hoping the service had not been disconnected. Once the phone had sufficient charge, I discovered the service was indeed inactive. However, the device could still connect to the home Wi-Fi network, allowing access to email and messaging apps. This would be my lifeline to the outside world. My first message went to Martha Stevens, my housekeeper for 15 years before Grace dismissed her, claiming budget constraints required staffing adjustments. Martha had been more than an employee. She was a confidant who knew the intimate workings of our household. Her phone number remained unchanged, and she answered on the first ring. Mrs. Roberts, what a wonderful surprise! Her warm voice brought tears to my eyes. I quickly explained my situation, keeping my tone measured despite the gravity of what I was sharing. I always knew something was not right with that woman, Martha said when I finished. The way she went through your personal papers when you were recovering from surgery, asking me questions about your finances and property, I tried to warn you before she let me go. I need your help, Martha, I said. Can you come to the house tomorrow when they are both out? Grace has a standing appointment at the spa on Thursday mornings, and William will be at the office. Martha agreed without hesitation, promising to arrive at 10 the following morning through the service entrance that was hidden from view of the main driveway. My next call was to Patricia Goldman, my attorney for over 20 years and one of my closest friends. Grace had systematically removed Patricia's contact information from my address book and phone, claiming Patricia had retired to Arizona. In reality, Patricia's firm was still operating less than 20 miles away. Amelia, we have been trying to reach you for months, Patricia exclaimed when her secretary put my call through. Your daughter-in-law told us you had decided to work with William's corporate attorney for estate matters. When I tried to confirm this with you directly, she said you were not taking calls due to health issues. I explained the situation, including the discovery of the property deed and other documents. Patricia listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the power of attorney forms I had signed and the specific wording of communications with doctors. This is elder abuse, Amelia, she said firmly when I finished. Isolation, gaslighting, financial exploitation, and now physical confinement. We need to move quickly, especially if they are already discussing selling your property. Patricia outlined a legal strategy that began with formally revoking any powers of attorney I had granted to William or Grace. She would also prepare documentation regarding the current ownership status of Harborview and my other assets. Keep a detailed journal of every incident, she advised. Dates, times, exact wording as best you can remember. Document any medication they give you, any doctor's appointments they schedule, any social events they exclude you from. This record will be crucial if we need to demonstrate a pattern of controlling behavior. With professional support secured, I created a simple journal using a notebook I found in the desk. Starting from James's death, I reconstructed a timeline of Grace's escalating control, noting specific incidents I could recall with clarity. I was careful to separate factual events from my interpretations or feelings about those events, creating an objective record that would stand up to scrutiny. Martha arrived as planned the next morning, bringing supplies I had requested: a prepaid phone with 6 months of service, a small digital camera, and several legal pads for continuing my documentation. Her familiar presence in the kitchen brought a sense of normalcy I had not experienced in months. The house feels different, Martha observed, looking around at Grace's modern decor, colder somehow. She has been systematically erasing any trace of the past, I said, particularly my past. Over coffee at the kitchen island, Martha shared information she had gathered about Grace since being dismissed. Through the network of household staff that existed in our affluent community, Martha had learned troubling details about my daughter-in-law's background. She has a pattern, Mrs. Roberts. Before William, there were 2 other relationships with wealthy older men. One ended when the gentleman's daughter became suspicious of missing funds. The other concluded with a substantial settlement after Grace threatened a lawsuit for broken promises. Martha had also discovered Grace was carrying significant debt when she met William, including maxed-out credit cards and a tax lien that mysteriously disappeared shortly after their engagement. This financial desperation explained the urgency behind Grace's efforts to gain control of my assets. Patricia arrived in the early afternoon, having rearranged her schedule to meet while Grace and William remained away. She brought copies of my original will and trust documents, which we compared to the versions in the safe. Everything appeared in order, confirming that legally, Harborview and all other assets remained solely in my name. The power of attorney documents you signed have concerning language, Patricia noted, reviewing the copies I had located in Grace's home office. These grant extremely broad authority with minimal oversight. However, they can be revoked at any time, as long as you can demonstrate mental competence. Patricia had brought new documents revoking all previously granted powers of attorney, which I signed immediately with Martha as witness. She also prepared updated versions that granted limited financial authority to Patricia's firm rather than family members, ensuring independent oversight of my affairs. Now, let us discuss the strategic approach, Patricia said, her legal mind shifting to the confrontation that would inevitably come. We could file for emergency protective orders based on the lockdown incident, but that would immediately escalate the situation to a legal battle that might damage your relationship with William permanently. I want to give my son one chance to see Grace for who she truly is, I said firmly. If he still chooses her manipulations over the truth, then we can proceed with legal action. Patricia nodded. In that case, we need the perfect moment for revelation. One where Grace cannot control the narrative or isolate you from potential allies. Martha, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Grace mentioned to the gardener that they are planning an anniversary party next month, 5 years since Mr. Roberts passed. She is framing it as a celebration of his legacy, but really showcasing the changes she has made to the house. This information aligned perfectly with conversations I had overheard. Grace was indeed planning an elaborate event, inviting community leaders and business associates to what she increasingly considered her home. That will be our opportunity, I decided. A public setting with witnesses, where she cannot dismiss me as confused or escort me away without raising suspicions. We spent the next 2 hours developing a detailed plan. Patricia would attend as my guest, bringing 2 colleagues from her firm. Martha would return to service temporarily, positioned to assist me at critical moments. Most importantly, we prepared a portfolio of documents proving my ownership of Harborview and evidence of Grace's systematic campaign to undermine my autonomy. As we finalized arrangements, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness that my relationship with William had deteriorated to this point, anger at Grace's manipulative destruction of our family bonds. But predominantly, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. After months of passive resistance, I was finally reclaiming control of my narrative and my home. Patricia left with copies of all essential documents secured in her briefcase. Martha departed with a list of preparations for the coming confrontation. As I watched them drive away, carefully timing their exits to avoid detection, I experienced something I had not felt in over a year. Hope. Over the next 3 weeks, I maintained the facade of the compliant, slightly confused mother-in-law that Grace expected. I accepted her decisions without complaint, took the medications she provided, though discreetly disposing of them, and showed appropriate enthusiasm for the anniversary event she was planning. Meanwhile, Martha made brief, strategic visits when the house was empty, bringing updates from Patricia and helping me prepare for the confrontation. We discovered a servant's passage connecting the east wing to the main floor, a remnant of the house's Victorian origins that Grace, in her focus on modernizing visible spaces, had never noticed. This hidden route would become crucial to my entrance at the anniversary party, allowing me to bypass any attempts to confine me to my room. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. The emotional toll of betrayal by my son and his wife remained painful, but it was increasingly overshadowed by determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The anniversary party was scheduled for a Saturday evening in June, exactly 5 years after James's passing. Grace had transformed the occasion from a somber remembrance into what she called a celebration of legacy and future vision, essentially using my husband's memory as a pretext for showcasing her renovations and social connections. The guest list included over 80 people: local business leaders, potential investors in Williams' projects, community figures, and a few token family friends who had known James. Grace had hired an event planning company, florists, caterers, and even a string quartet for the occasion. The morning of the party, I maintained my role as the compliant mother-in-law, commenting appreciatively on the flower arrangements and place settings. Grace, distracted by last-minute details, seemed pleased by my docile behavior. "Amelia, I have been thinking about tonight," she said as we reviewed the seating chart in the dining room. "These events can be so overwhelming with all the noise and people. Would you be more comfortable having a quiet evening in your suite? I could have a special dinner prepared, perhaps watch that British mystery series you enjoy." I had been expecting this attempt to sideline me. "That is very thoughtful, dear," I replied mildly. "Perhaps I will join for just the beginning to greet old friends, then retire early if it becomes too much." Grace frowned slightly, clearly having hoped for complete acquiescence. "Well, it might be confusing for guests to see you come and go. Better to either participate fully or rest for the evening." "I understand," I said, my tone deliberately vague enough that she could interpret it as agreement, without me actually committing to absence. By late afternoon, the house was transformed. Floral arrangements filled every room, catering staff prepared elaborate hors d'oeuvres in the kitchen, and the string quartet set up in the conservatory. I retreated to my suite as guests were expected to begin arriving at 7. Once alone, I changed into the outfit Martha had brought earlier in the week. A stunning silver evening gown that James had always loved, expertly altered to fit my current frame. I styled my hair elegantly, applied makeup with care, and added James's last gift to me, a platinum and diamond necklace he had commissioned for our 40th anniversary. At 6:30, a soft knock at the service entrance to my suite announced Martha's arrival. She entered carrying a garment bag to maintain our cover story if anyone saw her. "Everything is in place, Mrs. Roberts," she confirmed. Miss Goldman and her colleagues arrived early. They are currently in the library, positioned to observe without being obvious. Martha helped me with final preparations, including securing copies of the most important documents in a slim portfolio. At 6:45, another knock at the main door signaled Grace's final attempt to ensure my compliance. When I opened the door, Grace's smile faltered as she took in my appearance. "Amelia, you look formal. Did we have a miscommunication about this evening?" "I thought I would greet a few old friends before retiring," I said pleasantly. "James would have wanted me to thank people for remembering him." Grace's expression hardened momentarily before she regained her composure. "I appreciate the sentiment, but William and I have planned the evening carefully. Having you appear briefly and then leave might seem odd to guests. Perhaps it would be better to maintain consistency." "Consistency," I repeated, letting the word hang between us. "Yes," Grace continued. "Either participate in the full evening or allow yourself the rest you need. Given your recent episodes, I think we both know which option makes more sense." "I see," I said calmly. "You may be right. I will remain here and rest." Relief washed over Grace's features. "Wonderful. I will have Marisa bring you a special dinner tray. Try to get some sleep, even with the noise. Tomorrow I will tell you all about the event." After she left, I heard the now familiar sound of the key turning in the lock. This time, however, it brought a grim satisfaction rather than distress. Grace had once again demonstrated her controlling behavior, providing fresh evidence for the confrontation to come. Martha and I waited 30 minutes, listening as the house filled with guests. Through the heating vent, we could hear the murmur of conversations, occasional laughter, and the gentle background of string music. At 7:45, Martha eased open the hidden servant's door, revealing a narrow passage that would lead us to the butler's pantry adjacent to the dining room. "The dinner service begins at 8, Martha whispered. "Miss Goldman suggests making your entrance once everyone is seated but before the main course. Maximum impact with minimal opportunity for Grace to intervene." I nodded, feeling remarkably calm given the circumstances. We moved silently through the passage, its existence forgotten by most of the household. At the pantry, Martha checked that the coast was clear before we slipped into a small alcove with a view of the dining room. The scene before me was exactly as Grace had planned it: elegant, impressive, and completely divorced from the warm family home James and I had created. 80 guests in formal attire sat around tables arranged throughout the expanded dining area. At the head table, Grace presided in a designer gown, with William beside her looking handsome but somehow diminished in his perfectly tailored suit. Grace stood, tapping her glass for attention. "Welcome, dear friends, to this special evening remembering James Roberts and celebrating the future of Harborview," she began, her voice carrying perfectly through the space. As she spoke about James, a man she had never met, I felt a surge of protective anger. She talked about his vision for this property and how she and William were honoring his legacy by bringing Harborview into a new era. "As many of you know, we have spent the past 2 years renovating this historic home," Grace continued. "Tonight represents not just a memorial, but a glimpse into our plans for Harborview's future. William and I are exploring options to share this magnificent property more broadly with the community." Patricia Goldman, positioned at a table with a clear view of both Grace and my hiding spot, caught my eye and gave an imperceptible nod. It was time. Martha squeezed my hand. "Go show them who really owns Harborview," she whispered. I stepped from the alcove and moved deliberately toward the head table. For several seconds, no one noticed my approach, all attention focused on Grace's speech. Then heads began to turn as guests registered my presence. A ripple of confusion spread through the room as conversation faltered. Grace, still speaking about potential community partnerships, faltered as she noticed the changing atmosphere. She turned, her perfectly composed expression shattering as she saw me approaching. "Amelia!" she exclaimed, recovering quickly. "I thought you were resting upstairs." "I was," I replied, my voice clear and steady, "until I heard you discussing plans for my home's future without me." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. William half rose from his chair, expression torn between concern and embarrassment. "Mother gets confused sometimes," Grace explained to the room with a practiced, sympathetic smile. "William, perhaps you should help your mother back to her room while I continue with dinner." "I am not confused, Grace," I stated firmly, "though you have spent considerable effort trying to convince everyone that I am." Patricia stood from her table. "Good evening, everyone. I am Patricia Goldman, the Roberts family attorney for over 20 years. She approached, handing me the portfolio we had prepared. "Mrs. Roberts, would you like me to explain the current ownership status of Harborview to the assembled guests?" she asked formally. "Please do," I replied. Patricia addressed the increasingly uncomfortable gathering. Harborview remains solely owned by Amelia Roberts, as confirmed by county records and the original deed. She gestured to 2 colleagues who had risen from their seats. "My associates have copies of all relevant documentation for anyone with questions." Grace's face had drained of color. "This is a private family matter that has been unnecessarily brought into a social setting," she attempted, looking to William for support. William stood, confusion evident on his face. "Mom, what is going on? Why would you embarrass us like this in front of everyone?" "Embarrass you?" I repeated, maintaining my composure. "William, your wife locked me in my bedroom tonight to prevent me from attending this party in my own home. This is not the first time." Gasps rippled through the audience. Edward Harrington, James's oldest friend and a respected judge, spoke from a nearby table. "William, is this true?" William faltered. "She gets confused sometimes, wanders into situations that might be overwhelming. We were trying to protect her." "By imprisoning her," Patricia interjected sharply. I opened the portfolio, removing a document prepared by Patricia's office. This is a medical evaluation performed 3 days ago by Dr. Elise Hammond, a geriatric specialist, with no previous connection to our family. Her assessment confirms I have no cognitive impairment beyond mild, age-appropriate memory issues. Certainly nothing justifying the level of control exercised over my movements and finances. The room had grown deathly quiet. Grace attempted one last defense. Amelia has good days and bad days. Today appears to be a good day, but we have witnessed concerning episodes that necessitated intervention. Martha stepped forward from the serving staff. Mrs. Roberts, shall I share what I witnessed regarding the medication Mrs. Grace was administering to you without proper medical authorization? Grace's eyes widened in shock at Martha's appearance. You fired this woman months ago for theft, she said quickly. I did no such thing, I replied calmly. You dismissed Martha without my knowledge or consent, just as you canceled my social memberships, restricted my access to friends, and systematically removed me from participation in my own household. William was looking between Grace and me, doubt finally breaking through his blind trust in his wife. Grace, what is she talking about? You told me Mom wanted to let Martha go. Grace's composure cracked. William, your mother is manipulating this situation. Everything I have done has been to protect her and secure our future. Our future? I repeated. Or your future, Grace? Martha, please share what you discovered about Mrs. Grace's financial situation prior to meeting my son. As Martha detailed Grace's debt problems and previous relationships with wealthy men, Grace's facade completely collapsed. These are lies, she shouted, abandoning all pretense of concern. You ungrateful old woman. Everything I did was to bring this outdated mausoleum into the present century. Her outburst hung in the air, revealing her true character more effectively than any documentation could have. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some beginning to stand as if preparing to leave this increasingly personal confrontation. William stared at his wife, as if seeing her for the first time. Grace, is this true? Did you lock my mother in her room tonight? She would have embarrassed you in front of the investors, Grace hissed, not denying the action. She is my mother, William said slowly, realization dawning in his eyes. This is her home. I approached my son, placing a hand on his arm. William, there is much we need to discuss, but not here. For now, I think it would be best if Grace left Harborview. Grace looked around wildly, seeing support evaporating as her true nature became evident. This is ridiculous. William, are you going to let her throw me out, after everything I have done for this family? Edward Harrington stepped forward. I think it would be appropriate for everyone to give the Roberts family some privacy. Amelia, we will call you tomorrow. As guests began a dignified but hasty retreat, Patricia signaled to 2 men who had been waiting discreetly by the entrance. Mrs. Roberts hired security as a precaution, she explained to William. They will ensure Mrs. Grace leaves the property without removing anything that does not belong to her. The realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing seemed to hit Grace all at once. William, she pleaded, everything I did was for us. This house could set us up for life if we sell it to developers. That was your plan all along, William said quietly, the final pieces falling into place. To sell my childhood home out from under my mother. Grace's expression hardened as she recognized defeat. You will regret this, she spat, gathering her purse and shawl. Both of you. As security escorted her from the room, the remaining guests made tactful exits, leaving William and me standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be a celebration. My son turned to me, his face a mask of shame and confusion. Mom, I had no idea. I thought we were helping you. I thought, his voice broke. I thought she loved us. I took his hand, feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. We have much healing ahead of us, William. But tonight, I have reclaimed my home. Tomorrow, we can begin rebuilding our family. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Patricia sprang into action immediately, securing emergency orders preventing Grace from accessing any of my accounts or property. Security remained at Harborview around the clock for the first week, as Grace made several attempts to return and collect what she called her belongings, which mysteriously included family heirlooms and valuable artwork. The legal aftermath unfolded swiftly. All powers of attorney were formally revoked, and new estate documents created with proper safeguards. Patricia discovered Grace had already approached real estate developers about Harborview, presenting herself as an authorized representative with permission to discuss future options for the property. Most painful was William's gradual realization of how completely he had been manipulated. As Grace's mask fell away completely during divorce proceedings, he learned about credit card debt in his name, loans taken against his investments, and social connections damaged by lies Grace had told about him behind his back. "I cannot stay here right now," he told me 3 days after the party. "I need time to process everything, to understand how I could have been so blind." Though his departure hurt, I recognized his need for space. "Take the time you need," I told him. "This will always be your home when you are ready to return." With William gone and Grace legally barred from the property, I found myself alone in Harborview for the first time in years. The solitude, rather than frightening, felt purifying. I walked through each room, reacquainting myself with spaces that had been transformed without my consent. Some changes I kept, acknowledging that modernization was not inherently wrong. Others I reversed immediately, particularly the removal of family photographs and mementos that connected the house to its history. Each decision was consciously mine, an exercise in reclaiming agency after years of systematic disempowerment. Martha returned as my housekeeper and companion, bringing warmth and familiar routines back to daily life. "This house feels like itself again," she observed one morning as sunlight streamed through windows no longer obscured by Grace's heavy drapes. My healing journey progressed in parallel with the physical restoration of my home. The first weeks were marked by anger and disbelief, emotions I had suppressed during the long months of careful planning. I would find myself standing in rooms where particularly painful incidents had occurred, reliving the gaslighting and isolation with fresh outrage now that I could safely acknowledge those feelings. Patricia connected me with Dr. Eleanor Wright, a therapist specializing in recovery from psychological abuse. Our weekly sessions provided crucial support as I processed not only Grace's betrayal, but the more painful reality of William's complicity. "Even good people can enable abuse when they cannot recognize it," Dr. Wright explained during one particularly difficult session. "William's blindness doesn't excuse his actions, but understanding its origins will be essential to rebuilding your relationship if that is what you choose." 3 months after the confrontation, I took a significant step in reclaiming my social identity by hosting a small gathering for my oldest friends. Many had been systematically cut off by Grace's interference, left believing I no longer wished for their company. "We knew something was wrong," Barbara confessed as we sat in the garden. "The Amelia we knew would never just disappear from our lives. But every time we called, Grace had a different excuse for why you could not come to the phone." Reconnecting with my circle provided more than companionship. It restored my sense of continuity with my pre-Grace life. These were people who knew the real Amelia, who could reflect back to me the strong, capable woman I had been before the systematic erosion of my confidence. By the 6-month mark, tangible changes demonstrated how far I had come. With Patricia's guidance, I established the Roberts Foundation for Elder Rights, using a portion of my resources to fund education and legal support for older adults facing exploitation or abuse. The Foundation's first initiative provided training for medical professionals on recognizing signs of elder abuse, particularly the subtle psychological manipulation I had experienced. Harborview itself received new security systems, including cameras that could have provided evidence of my confinement had they existed earlier. I updated my legal protections, creating a robust trust with multiple layers of oversight to prevent any future attempt to seize control of my assets. The most challenging aspect of recovery remained my relationship with William. Our initial contact consisted of brief phone calls and occasional emails, each weighted with unspoken grief and regret. 5 months after moving out, he asked to visit. Our reunion in the library where we had spent so many hours during his childhood was tentative at first. William looked older, the strain of recent months evident in new lines around his eyes. "I kept asking myself how I could have been so blind," he said after initial pleasantries had been exchanged. I have spent months in therapy trying to understand why I enabled her behavior. And what have you learned? I asked gently. That I was afraid of losing her approval. That somewhere along the way, I began seeing you through her eyes rather than my own. He looked down at his hands. That I failed in the most basic duty of a son to protect his mother. We both were manipulated, William, I acknowledged. My failure was in not trusting my own perceptions sooner, in doubting myself when I knew something was wrong. That conversation marked the beginning of a careful rebuilding. William returned to Harborview gradually, first for dinner once a week, then overnight stays in his old room. 3 months later, he moved back permanently, occupying the guest house on the property rather than the main residence, a boundary that respected both our need for independence. The divorce proceedings revealed the full extent of Grace's deception. Beyond the financial manipulation and psychological abuse already documented, investigators discovered a pattern of similar behavior with previous partners. Grace ultimately accepted a settlement that provided no ongoing financial support, knowing the alternative was potential criminal charges for elder abuse and financial exploitation. 1 year after the confrontation, Harborview hosted another gathering, this one truly celebrating legacy and future. Friends, family, and community members, who had stood by us through the difficult transition, filled the gardens on a perfect summer evening. William, now rebuilding his career independent of Grace's influence, raised a toast. To my mother, Amelia Roberts, who taught me that strength sometimes means standing your ground, even when those who should support you do not. The journey from victim to victor had transformed me in ways I never anticipated. The woman who emerged from Grace's systematic campaign of control was more vigilant but also more compassionate, understanding firsthand how vulnerability can be exploited even in those who appear strong. I discovered that healing is not a destination, but an ongoing process. Some days still brought anger or sadness when memories surfaced unexpectedly. Other days filled me with gratitude for the friends and professionals who believed me when my own son had doubted. The most profound lesson came in recognizing that true freedom requires both vigilance and forgiveness. Vigilance to protect the boundaries that keep us safe. Forgiveness, not to excuse those who harmed us, but to release ourselves from the burden of carrying their betrayal forward into our new lives. Today, as I sit in the garden James and I planned together decades ago, I reflect on what I would tell others facing similar situations. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even when others dismiss your concerns. Document everything, even small incidents that seem insignificant in isolation. Build a support network outside your immediate family, people with no conflicting loyalties who can see situations objectively. Most importantly, remember that age may change our bodies but need not diminish our dignity or autonomy. The right to make our own decisions, to live in our own homes, to maintain our own social connections never expires, regardless of what those who claim to protect us might suggest. Have you ever had to reclaim your power from someone who tried to take it from you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more reflections from those of us who have learned life's hardest lessons the long way. Remember to like this video and share it with someone who might need to be reminded of their own strength. Thank you for walking this path with me today, and remember, it is never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim what is rightfully yours.